So I'm going to take you back to 2013. And as Dom said, I was running a village pub not too far from here, the King's Arms in Lockerley. And I thought I had a very, very good life, a great life. I had a wonderful young son who was about 2.5 at the time called Sam. And I was going out with an amazing lady called Lucy, who's done your catering today. But I was a functioning alcoholic. Now, we lived above the pub, and I was probably drinking a barrel of Guinness a week and probably 12 to 16 bottles of wine on top of that. In the meantime, I was being a stay-at-home dad to my little boy. I was in charge of that 2.5-year-old. And in November 2013, I caught what I thought was just man flu, and being a man, I moaned and moaned and moaned about it. It was the worst flu you could possibly get. But after about 2.5 weeks, it got worse and worse and worse. And all of a sudden, one night, I woke up, and I went to the loo, and I could see blood in my urine. We knew at that point that there was something quite serious. The following day, I said to Lucy, look, darling, I really don't feel very well. She said, look, don't worry. I'll go to work in the morning. When I come back, if you still feel really rough, then I'll call for the doctor. So Lucy went to her other site. And when I got up, I was semi-conscious. My skin was turning purple. I couldn't put my clothes on. I couldn't operate my hands or my feet. I managed to stagger downstairs when I heard a knock at the back door, and there was Lucy and my stepfather, and they were just mortified at what they saw. They called an ambulance straight away, which came to the pub pretty quickly, and then I was dispatched over to Winchester. Now, we had to cut 10 minutes off the journey time to get me into intensive care. The paramedics felt that I was simply not going to survive unless we cut that time down. When I got to intensive care, luckily for me, I was diagnosed as having strep A. Now, we'd never heard of strep, and luckily for us, the one consultant that was working that day had seen one other case over in South Africa. I was immediately placed on life support, and that's where I stayed for 4 days. And after about the 3rd day, I was given a 3% chance of survival. So Lucy and my mother were told to go home and prepare to say their final goodbyes. Now, about 18 months ago, I was in Toronto, and I was about to address 300 multimillionaires in a room for Robin Sharma. And Lucy and I went out for dinner that night, and she said, do you know what you're going to talk about to all these people? And I said, well, not really. I'll just talk about my story and my life and what I've done, blah, blah, blah. But I said, Lucy, I've never asked you, when you were told to go away and think about what you'd say to your partner, your loved one, to prepare your final goodbyes, what were you going to say? And before she could get a bit of sushi to her mouth, she said, all I could think about was who was going to take out the bins. So with that amount of love in the corner, luckily I did survive, and I did wake up from my coma, thanks to some incredibly talented anaesthetist. And then I was moved over to Salisbury, and I thought, having woken up, that I'd beat the infection. I thought I was getting better. Now, when I got to Salisbury, I was met by the most beautiful plastic surgeon who wafted in, and she walked around me, and she had a look, and she said, good afternoon, how are you? I said, I'm great, how are you? And she said, well, you're not very well, are you? And I said, no, but I've been taught to respect women, be polite when I meet people. She said, right, you're certainly going to lose your left arm above the elbow because the strep's trying to get to your heart, and if it gets there, it'll kill you. We think we can save your lower legs, but we're not sure. And I think I can rebuild your right arm to keep your right hand, and you'll certainly lose the majority of your face. And then she was gone. And I was lying there on my own thinking, what the fuck was that? I was freaking out. I was going nuts. But in reality, I couldn't move. And subsequently, as you see, I lost my left arm above the elbow. They couldn't save my lower leg, so I lost both legs above the knee. I've had my right shoulder fused onto my face. I've had my entire left shoulder moved into my right arm. And I've had all the skin on my back and my stomach moved onto my legs. So my whole body's been moved around. And in that 7 months in Salisbury, we had lots of operations, about 100 hours in total, I think. And it was torturous for the first couple of months. But after that, I started to realize just how lucky I'd been. And I started to look at my plastic surgeon in a different light. She wasn't the devil dressed in blue. She was doing her level best to try and give me a chance of a life when I left that unit. And the nurses and all the healthcare assistants were unbelievable. They were fantastic. But healthcare assistants, because my mouth was so small initially, it was the size of a 5p coin. So every Saturday evening, all the healthcare assistants would be queuing up outside my room, waiting to feed me, because it took about an hour and a half to feed me a sandwich. And I couldn't work out why there was this queue forming. In reality, they knew that if they got into my room at 7 o'clock, they could watch X Factor uninterrupted while they were feeding me a sandwich. So 7 months later, I leave the unit and I go home, and I have no idea about the future and what it may hold for me. We lost the business, we lost our home, we moved into a new house. And in all of this was my lovely son, who was 3 at the time by now. And I remember when he came to see me just before Christmas in 2013, he came into the unit and he hid behind his mother. He was petrified of what he saw. He could not come up to me. He was absolutely scared stiff. So I knew that I had to rebuild this relationship with my son. I had to rebuild the relationship with Lucy, which had suffered so long through my alcoholism and then subsequently losing all my limbs. And my best friend at the time, Chris Bagley, who was an incredible guy, he used to fly in from Courchevel every fortnight, and he'd spend the weekend with me. And we discussed the future and what it may hold. And when it was time for me to go home or move into a new home, I was scared stiff about not being able to contribute to the family, not being able to be a father to my son. How was I going to act around him? How could I connect with him again? And my best mate said, you don't have to worry about that. I've given up my job in Courchevel. I'm going to move in with you for 6 months, and we're going to figure all this out. And from that point, it was an incredible journey of discovery, learning to use prosthetics, understanding wheelchairs. And we got the relationship back on track with my son. And I was very wary of the hand that they saved in the surgery while I was in hospital. Until one day, I got the chance to go and meet Holly Willoughby in London. Now, Holly Willoughby was a huge thing in my life, an enormous thing in my life. My pet passport and my Labrador is Holly Willoughby Lewis. So this was a dream come true for me. So me and my best mate, we went to London and we had a great day out and we got absolutely wrecked. And we came home that night and we then drank in the Greyhound, our other site, for a couple of hours. Lucy had no idea where we were. We spent 500 quid on taxis getting home. We had the most incredible day. When I got home that night, I went to bed. Obviously, Lucy was glaring at me. And the following morning, I tried to push myself up with my remaining arm, and I couldn't do it. So I managed to roll over. I got myself up. And as I raised my right arm, I'd snapped it clean in half. Now, I couldn't feel it, but the visual was startling. I was rushed back into Salisbury, and it was at that point, my arm was put in a cast. I met all my plastic surgery team again. And the plastic surgeon, Alex Crick, who lives about 2 minutes from here, she came up to me after about 7 hours. I was in the waiting room. My best mate was beside me, hungover asleep. And I'm sat there, and she came up to me, and she knelt down. And this woman that was so cold at the beginning knelt down, and she was crying. Now, I could see then that the prognosis was not good. And she said, look, we can try and pin it. We can try and rebuild it. It may mean another 2 years of you not using it. There's a chance that it might not ever work anyway, or we can amputate. And I've done podcasts for business before, and they talk about clear choices. And the clear choice for me at that moment was to get the arm off, amputate. I didn't want to spend the next 2 years of my life trying to reconnect with my son, being unable to muck around on the floor, being unable to learn to operate the wheelchair and prosthetics and all the other things that I needed for assistive devices. So the arm came off. Now, I was at my lowest ebb at that point because we'd hit rock bottom. And after that, we went on a voyage of discovery in terms of prosthesis and what was available to me on the National Health Service. Now, I was picked up by a charity, and they sent me over to the US. And over in the US, they give you a life quote for assistive devices and prosthetics. And I got a life quote of £3.5 million to get me from 34 to 60 in prosthetics, wheelchairs, and adaptions. Now, I got on the plane, and I came back to the UK. And when I got back, I just did not know what the hell I was going to do. Didn't have a clue. And by chance, I was invited to speak at a school in Warminster. And I spoke about my journey and what had gone on and, you know, all the amputations and the prosthetics and limb loss and whatnot. And there was a guy there who was working at Imperial. And he was working on something called muscle whispering technology, which I had no understanding of at that point. But he invited me to be a guinea pig up at the university. And I had nothing to lose at that point. There was no way in the world I was going to raise that 3.5 million anytime soon. I just did not have the know-how. And when I went to Imperial, I discovered all these students that wanted to make a difference. They were working on some incredible products. And I became their lab guinea pig for about 4 years. And we probably worked with about 50 or 60 students now. And they've all spurred out and started their own companies in assistive tech, in muscle whispering tech, in AI, in VR. And it's all about helping the amputee community. But obviously, there's a much wider audience. I feel that in prosthetics, if someone says to me, you're going to need 2 legs that are going to cost you more than a Lamborghini and a Ferrari put together, well, I say, why can't I use an exoskeleton that's more widely available, that there's far more research and development in? And I almost got a sense that I was going to have to disrupt the sector to make it benefit me and the others going through it. I was not alone. Out in America, there was probably 30 or 40 people like me, and a lot didn't have insurance. So they were all facing the same problem, that huge amount of money for prosthesis. So the work with Imperial had started, and in the meantime, I was filmed for a Channel 4 documentary. And it charted the first 2 years of my life, really, and Lucy's life and my son's life. And when it went out, we had this outpouring of love and support in a global community. But I found that a lot of people that wanted to get in contact with me, they weren't asking me about how I cope with being disabled and being an amputee. It was all about my mental health, my mental state. Why is it that I could cope with it and deal with it and move forward and forge relationships and press ahead when other people simply couldn't understand that there was a life for me to have? And when I was picked up by the military, they said, look, your headspace and your mindset is similar to what we want to try and teach the lads who are injured. So I was invited to go skydiving, which is great. I thought, do you know what, I've never tried it, let's give it a go. So I go to Netherhaven, and I arrive, and this guy says, are you ready to go skydiving? I said, yep. I said, how many quadruple amputees have you skydived with? And he said, none. So I said, okay. I said, so you know how this is going to work? He went, nope. I said, I've got to be honest, you're not filling me with confidence in this. And he said, well, all I've got is duct tape. And I kid you not, I was absolutely wrapped from bottom of stump to head in duct tape. And I did that tandem skydive, and I had 14,000 feet skydive. It was just incredible. And this comedian sat behind me, strapped to me. But for that first minute of free fall, when I came out of that plane, that was the first time that I hadn't felt disabled. I just felt like everyone else who'd gone skydiving. I had that 1 minute to look at the view, take it all in. And when I got to the bottom, I realized then that there wasn't a single opportunity that I was going to let pass me by. So 6 months later, I kayaked around the southern tip of Greenland with the military. I went cage diving out in South Africa. The following year, we kayaked along the Orange River for about 17 days. And these were great trips, amazing trips. But they were far more for personal development. And for me, that wasn't enough. I enjoyed it. I loved every minute of it. But I wanted to do more. So then we went to the University of Southampton. We said, look, guys, I've done some great trips, but I want to do something really special. I want a legacy to leave behind. So we designed the world's first solar-powered, battery-assisted, 4-wheel off-road hand cycle. And with that, we raised £50,000 in London, and we set up a wheelchair factory in Bahadar in Ethiopia. So we flew out, we took the incredible hand cycle with us, and we cycled up to about 4,500 meters of their highest mountain. And then I climbed to the top the rest of the way. Now, when I got to the top of that mountain, the guy to haul me on to the top of the mountain was the man that saved my life 6 years ago. Jeff Watson, the guy that is the reason that I'm here, was the man at the top of the mountain. And when I got there, huge emotion and tears and crying, and he's really cool, so he didn't cry. And he was patting me on the back. I said, God, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. And he said, it's the same. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. And as I'm still crying, still overwhelmed with emotion. And then he said, by the way, the top's another 30 meters that way. So as I shuffled the other 30 meters, and I got to the top, and I looked out, and I realized that everything that I've done, it's taken an incredible team. I am no solo effort. To get me to that mountain, to get me to go skydiving, to get me to go kayaking, hand cycling, whatever it may be, all the work with the universities, all the businesses that we're now involved with, It all depends on the team. And very early on, I had an email from Chris Martin of Coldplay, and he said, "Look, I've read about your journey in the New York Times, and I think it's amazing, and I want to help your trust." And he said, "I think you should read one book that altered my life," and it was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Now, for those of you who've read it, it's a really hard read about prisoners of war in Auschwitz. And it's a study of human behavior and how some people coped with it and lived and some didn't. And in that, he discussed how once you work out the why, you will endure anyhow. Now, right at the beginning, my why was my son and was Lucy. The reason that I was willing to live and to experiment and to work hard to become independent was because of them. Lucy, after about 4 months of me being in hospital, turned around and she goes, "You've got 2 years to sort your shit out." 2 years. I'm not having you come home and sit around and mope and get depressed. She was such a driving force. And I had a little boy. That little boy, he was scared stiff of me 6 years ago, is now 9, and he is now my on-site mechanic. He knows more about wheelchairs and prosthetics than I do. He's amazing with a screwdriver, even better with a socket set. He's an absolute dream. But more importantly, he sees that disability has not stopped his father in any way whatsoever. Now, all of you here would probably think, yeah, but you'd want your legs and arms back. Well, I wouldn't. I would not be the man I am today without having gone through that situation 7 years ago. It's taught me so much, and I've met some incredible people along the way, and they've shaped and altered my life massively. And I know moving forward, we've got projects in Mongolia, Uganda, Sierra Leone, projects in the UK, projects in Mongolia. I should have been hand cycling around the Gobi around now if it hadn't been for this pesky COVID-19. And we would have been setting up assistive device centres there, because it may not be that people in third worlds need wheelchairs. It might be something assistive that gives them the ability to go horse riding with disability, the ability to use a motorbike in remote parts of the world like that. All these problems are solved by great teams and great people. The team behind me now is enormous. From Lucy and Sam at the beginning, it's probably gone on to be, in honesty, thousands and thousands of people. Through the documentary, I have 1 million unread messages of support. Now, I can't just go back and be a normal guy, knowing that so many people out there have so much love and respect for how I've ended up. For me, moving forward, it's all about having that ability to inspire and create change. And that's the reason why you're all here today, is to learn how to create change. And inspiration for me, inspiration comes from Lucy, but more importantly, it comes from my little boy. Every day I get up, it's to prove to him that I can achieve, I can contribute, I am inclusive, I can help other people and work hard towards it. Strep has given me the most incredible life in the last 7 years, and I'm sure that that will continue with the support I have. But it all depends on the team behind me, and I'm so thankful of all those people. I could not be any prouder of the people that I've met. And I hope that my little boy can see that everything that we've done and everything we tried to achieve was all born from him. He's just a really great kid, and he's the driving force for me. I think disability in the UK is not greatly served. There's lots of improvements to be made, but we are an incredible nation, an amazing nation of engineers, and we can problem solve. Not only can we problem solve in the UK, but we can problem solve globally as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time.